Good evening. Tonight, we begin with the sea that does not forgive, and with men who believed it would. The year is 1845. The Industrial Revolution is still young and full of pride, and the British Empire believes there is nothing left upon the map that cannot be reached with iron, coal, and prayer. Two ships wait at Greenhithe on the Thames, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror. They gleam like new coins under a damp gray sky. On their hulls the paint is still fresh, the copper sheathing polished, the flags uncreased by any wind. 129 men prepare to depart, bound for the high white latitudes of the Arctic. Their mission is simple to describe and nearly impossible to achieve: to find the Northwest Passage, that elusive corridor of ice and water linking the Atlantic to the Pacific, a line that has haunted maps for centuries like a rumor of salvation. The man who leads them is Sir John Franklin, a veteran explorer now in his late 50s, a man who has seen both triumph and humiliation. He is stout, courteous, and carries himself with the confidence of one who has already outlived his own legend. On the morning of May 19, 1845, the anchors are raised. Families wave from the shore. Church bells ring in Kent. The ships slide down the brown river toward the open sea, accompanied by small boats and cheers that fade quickly into fog. They will stop in Greenland for supplies and letters, and then sail west into a silence no one on deck can imagine. It is a silence older than nations, a place where compasses tremble and the sun forgets its path. For a while, everything goes according to plan. They send letters home from Dieskau Bay, cheerful, ordinary letters filled with small jokes about the cold, the biscuits, the seals. In them there is no fear. The men describe landscapes of green icebergs glowing like cathedral glass, and a sea so calm that reflections of the rigging hang beneath the water like a second ship. They promise to return in 2 years. They never do. After Greenland, the ships are sighted once more by a whale near Baffin Bay. It is July 1845. The whale's captain notes that the Erebus and Terra are well provisioned, and that the men appear in high spirits. Then, the sea closes around them like a door. Months pass, then years. No news returns. The Admiralty waits, confident at first, then restless. In London, Lady Jane Franklin begins to petition for search expeditions. By 1848, when the ships are officially declared lost, she refuses to accept it. Over the next decade, more than 30 search missions will fan out across the Arctic. They will find wreckage, messages, bones, but never the living. We must pause here and imagine what it was to wait. The men aboard the Erebus and Terror are trapped, not in a storm, but in something worse: stillness. By September 1846, the ships are locked fast in ice near King William Island. The sun lowers each day, smaller, paler, until it slips below the horizon for months. In that darkness, the air itself becomes a wall. Sound travels strangely. Even whispers feel brittle. The candles gutter, the stoves smoke. Their food, sealed in thousands of shiny tins, begins to taste of metal. At first, they do not understand why. Those tins are the pride of British technology: preserved meat and soup, sealed with soft solder made of lead. The lead leaches into the food and water, slowly poisoning them. Symptoms begin subtly: fatigue, confusion, aching joints. Then come stomach cramps, paralysis, and madness. Some blame scurvy, others the weather. The truth sits invisibly in the marrow of every man, like frost inside bone. Still, they keep routine. Each morning the deck is cleared of snow. The men exercise in heavy boots. write logs, mend sails they may never raise again. The officers dined together, speaking in calm tones about latitude and drift, pretending that discipline is a cure for despair. They read aloud from the Bible and from Pickwick Papers. Someone plays a flute. Someone else laughs too loudly and then falls silent. In the night, the timbers groan as the ice squeezes the hulls. The sound is like distant thunder beneath the floorboards of the world. Franklin keeps hope longer than most. He writes brief notes, charts small corrections on maps, but in June 1847, he dies of illness, exhaustion, perhaps lead. The journal entries stop for a few days. The men wrap his body and bury it under the snow, marking the grave with stones. Now leadership falls to Captain Crozier of the Terror, an Irishman of quiet resolve. He orders rations cut. They have endured 2 winters. A third would mean certain death. In April 1848, with the ships still frozen solid, they make the decision no sailor wishes to make, to abandon the ships and march south toward the mouth of the Back River, hoping to find a fur trading post or rescue. 105 men set out pulling sledges heavy with boats, food, and the ghosts of their friends. The route is known now only from the traces they left behind: torn canvas, a pair of boots, a silver spoon engraved FMC for Francis McClintock. Along that trail, the snow remembers everything. Later searchers would find skeletons face down, limbs twisted as if in prayer. One man's bones bore marks of a knife. Another's skull had been opened. These were not crimes of cruelty, but of hunger, the body turning on itself in the final logic of survival. The Arctic does not judge, it merely preserves. And so the names of Franklin's men passed into rumor: the Lost Expedition, the White Silence, the Feast of Bones. Newspapers back in England filled with speculation. Some claimed they had joined the Inuit, others that they had found the passage and were living happily beyond the ice. None of it was true. The ice had claimed them utterly. It would take a century for that truth to thaw. When the ice finally began to loosen its grip on that corner of the world, most of the men who had once sailed there were already dust-sealed in frost. Years passed, and then decades. The Arctic kept its silence. It was not until the 1850s that fragments of their fate began to surface: scraps of wood, silver spoons, a button, a note folded so many times that the creases had become part of the paper's grain. Rescue ships followed rumors like breadcrumbs across an ocean that did not want to give anything back. One, led by Francis Leopold McClintock, found a cairn of stones on King William Island. Inside lay a message: 2 versions of the same note. The first, dated 1847, was cheerful, reporting all well. The second, added a year later in another hand, was short, practical, and devastating. It recorded Franklin's death, the decision to desert the ships, and the number of survivors remaining, 105. Beneath those numbers, the signatures of men who were themselves already half ghosts. The public in London read those lines printed in the Illustrated London News as if they were holy scripture. Victorian curiosity became obsession. Was Franklin a martyr of science or a fool led by pride? Lady Jane Franklin financed more searches, refusing to let her husband's name sink beneath the ice. The expeditions found relics but never answers. By the turn of the 20th century, the story had drifted into myth and empire's frozen dream, an unfinished sentence on the map. Time went on. The sea closed again. Then, more than a century after the ships vanished, another kind of expedition went north, not in search of glory, but of evidence. In the summer of 1981, a small team of Canadian scientists, led by Dr. Owen Beatty, sailed to Beechey Island, a gravel spit off the coast of Devon Island, where earlier searchers had found 3 wooden markers bearing the names of Franklin's men. The graves were dated 1846, the expedition's first winter in the Arctic. There were no records of violence or catastrophe from that year. It was supposed to have been a quiet season. So why had 3 men died so early? The team carried drills, cameras, and the kind of caution that comes from disturbing the long dead. They chipped at the gravel, then at the permafrost, layer by layer. The Arctic resisted even that small intrusion. It took days to uncover the first coffin. When at last they lifted the lid, the air that escaped smelled faintly of iron and ice. Inside lay a boyish face, framed by frozen fabric. John Torrington, age 20. His skin was pale blue, his hair still clinging to his forehead, eyelashes rimmed with frost. He looked asleep, as if waiting for the morning watch. His comrades, when later examined, showed the same. The poison came from the very tins meant to sustain them, from the solder that sealed their food, from the pipes of the ship's water system. Every meal was a slow dose, every sip a nail in a long invisible coffin. They had eaten themselves to death by degrees. Beatty's team also found traces of pneumonia and scurvy, the familiar companions of cold confinement, but it was the lead that explained the delirium, the staggering, the irrational decisions reported by Inuit witnesses decades earlier. Pale men dragging heavy sledges in circles, muttering prayers, dropping one by one into the snow. What had once seemed madness now looked like chemistry. News of the discovery spread quickly. Magazines printed the photographs of Torrington's face, tranquil, eerily intact. Readers stared, fascinated and uneasy. There was beauty in that stillness, but also a kind of accusation. Look what curiosity does when it forgets humility. He became an icon of tragic exploration, the frozen saint of the North. Tourists began visiting Beechey Island, leaving coins and notes on the graves. The Arctic, indifferent as always, covered their footprints within hours. And yet, the story did not end even there. In the early 21st century, sonar teams scanning the seabed of the Canadian Arctic archipelago located two shadows resting upright on the silt. In 2014 they confirmed the first, the Erebus. 2 years later came the second, the Terror, astonishingly well preserved, its masts broken but its hull nearly whole. Inside, glass bottles still stood upright on shelves. Dishes lay stacked in cupboards. A boot rested where someone had left it. The cold had done what no museum could. It had kept everything waiting. Imagine, for a moment, the silence of those cabins, snow filtering through a shattered skylight, a table where a logbook once lay, a spoon beside a cup, still cloudy with residue of tea turned to ice. These are not ruins so much as paused lives. If the sailors of the Erebus and Terra could wake, they would find the same world around them, the same white walls of sea. Only we have changed, learning at last to listen to what the ice remembers. The tragedy of the Franklin expedition is not just a cautionary tale about hubris or technology. It is a meditation on limits, the boundary between endurance and delusion, faith and denial. Franklin and his men were not villains. They were the inevitable result of an age that believed progress was immune to nature. Their ships were fitted with steam engines, reinforced bows, even small libraries. Yet they went to a place where no machine mattered, where survival depended on humility before wind and water. The Arctic offered them no enemies to fight, only itself. When we read their letters today, the cheerful notes from Dieskau Bay, the brief official messages in block capitals, we hear something beneath the ink, the voice of a century certain that knowledge alone could master pain. It is the same voice that built the railways, that measured mountains, that charted every sea except the one within. In that sense, the Franklin expedition is not ancient history but an unfinished mirror. Each age has its own ice in which it becomes trapped. As for John Torrington, his body rests again beneath gravel and snow. After study, he was reinterred with care. A new coffin, a plaque, a prayer. The permafrost sealed over him once more, and the Arctic resumed its breathing. Those who stood at the graveside described a strange quiet, not solemn, exactly, but vast, as though the land itself absorbed the words and stored them away. No birds called. Even the wind seemed to drift around rather than through. It was a silence that asked for neither forgiveness nor explanation. It simply was. If you travel there today, to Beechey Island, you will find almost nothing. A line of wooden posts, a cairn of stones, and the endless pale horizon of Lancaster Sound. The ships that once left England to conquer the Northwest Passage rest now at the bottom of that same dream. The men who manned them lie scattered across the tundra, names fading from the ledgers of memory. Yet, in a way, they succeeded. They mapped not the route between two oceans, but the fragile passage between ambition and acceptance. The moment a man realizes that endurance is not conquest. The historian in me could end there, but stories have a way of lingering. Sometimes, in old recordings from the Arctic, you can hear a faint creak beneath the ice, a groan, a sigh, perhaps the shifting of trapped timber. It sounds almost like a ship adjusting its weight. Perhaps it is only the sea moving. Or perhaps it is the Erebus reminding us that nothing truly disappears. It merely changes its temperature. When night falls in that latitude, the stars burn close and cold. Somewhere beneath them, the frozen faces of Franklin's crew remain untouched, eyes closed, dreams paused. John Torrington, 20 years old, asleep in the ice, his breath stilled, his story traveling farther than he ever could. He never found the Pacific. But he reached something else, a strange kind of immortality, the calm that follows all storms. So, as you listen now, imagine the creak of the hull, the hiss of snow against canvas, the faint rattle of chains in a wind older than history. Imagine a lantern swaying in the dark, a page turning, a cup raised in a toast that freezes before it can fall. The expedition continues in that suspended instant, halfway between agony and peace, between the living and the remembered. And somewhere, beyond the horizon, the ice sighs once more and closes. Good night.